Welcome to the official YouTube channel for me, the Colin Cowherd Podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button right there so you don't miss any of our football content this postseason. Going to have instant reactions after every big game. Thanks. Our Week 18 reaction is presented by Uber Eats. Get game day deals all season long on Uber Eats. It's time to look at this weekend's tastiest matchup in this week's Monday Night Foodball, brought to you by Uber Eats. All right, we're doing a Monday afternoon, Monday night version. This past weekend was pretty choppy, and I went to Chicago to hang out with Ann and family. So I let John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, take over the controls. So instead, we'll do a late Monday afternoon podcast. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. There's coaches getting fired left and right. Jerod Mayo out in New England. Doug Pederson. You know, it's weird about these coaching ejections. Like Doug Pederson in Philadelphia with a strong foundational owner and general manager had some real success. And then you put him with Trent Baalke and the Khan family and in a shakier franchise, and he takes the fall. You know, it doesn't matter if it's, I mean, Tom Coughlin, I guess, is the last coach that consistently won there. You know, of all these openings right now, I mean, we know we've got the Jets and the Saints and the Bears. We've got the Jags in New England. Is there one that's attractive to you? If you were in the market to be a coach, is there one, John, that's attractive to
Well, I
you?
got to start by saying happy birthday. Happy 50th.
Thanks. Yeah, there you go, buddy.
I would say the Jags would be last on that list. I mean, that is the place where, let's face it, careers for coaches go to die. And the
Yeah.
Trent Baalke situation, you know, for a guy that started at Bemidji State in the Dakotas, he's a pretty good politician. I mean, he's run through a lot of coaches in his career. And that connection, you know, part of being in a front office, you get an unfair advantage during the game when the coach is on the sideline with the players. You're usually sitting next to the owner in a Diet Coke talking crap about their decisions. I think easily New England when you factor in the quarterback and the longevity of the history they've proven with Bill of, you know, just letting a guy run it. Now, they said Elliott Wolf, who I don't know personally, I've met him a couple times over the years. I mean, at one point in time, he looked like the future Packer GM, but they said he's going to stay. So if Vrabel or whoever is interested in that job, do I have to work with this guy? Is he technically not the GM? He's just the head of personnel. It's a little clunky. All these jobs are pretty clunky, Colin. And I think one consistent theme we saw, these owners don't want to, you know, ideally they don't want to go on a search because on these searches with coaches and GMs, they're speaking Chinese while the owner's speaking Spanish. It's easy for them to hire business people. Why? They speak the same language. The coach is coming in talking offensive and defensive scheme. It'd be hard for me to follow, let alone these guys. So I think when you saw John Mara, Jim Irsay, Stephen Ross, they just wanted no part of it. I really think New England just so desperate for Mike Vrabel, which I totally understand, is why Jerod Mayo, they put out a statement of, I would guess, easily over 1,000 words, like 5 minutes after the game. You don't write that. I mean, that thing was written on Saturday, Colin.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I agree with you. I think the Patriots is the best gig. You know, Chicago's so political. All the Chicago teams right now are struggling. The White Sox are historically bad. The Wills family with Blackhawks, they've got $1 billion business beyond the hockey team. But, you know, Reinsdorf, the Bulls situation, the Bears, the McCaskies, it's not a city, despite being, you know, third largest American city. It's not a city with rich owners. It's got sort of older owners where the team is the primary business. How do you grade the Bears as a job? I mean, there's obviously some upside, but I consider this, and maybe this is something coaches don't think about, but Jesus, the Packers win. The Lions have everything in place. The Vikings have always been a pretty solid, well-run organization with what is the hot young coach in the NFL. Do you consider that? Do you consider or do you just go get the coach? The coach doesn't think about it. I mean, Harbaugh saying, I want to take on Andy Reid. But the truth is, Denver and the Raiders are kind of been wobbly franchises for most of the last 7, 8 years. Are the Bears is that a good
I think
job?
it's a terrible job. And I think it all gets back to ownership. I think it's different, but Mike Shanahan once upon a time took over the Redskins, and you just don't overcome an owner. And I think that's a consistent theme. Listen, whatever Shad Khan seems like a nice guy, whatever's going on there with leadership's bad. The Bears have now a pretty consistent history of, it's a mom. I've had friends that have worked there. They discuss it being a mom and
Yeah.
pop shop. And that was a knock
Yes.
on the Chargers for a long time. What did they do? They built a $300 million practice facility. They break the bank for Jim Harbaugh. Obviously, they kind of luck into Herbert, and it changes their franchise. But they had to start spending serious money. And I fully expect a random guy to be the head coach of the Bears. If I had to guess right now, it'd be like the Arizona Cardinals offensive coordinator. Someone, because that's typically when you just look at the history. And up until Jim Harbaugh was hired with the Chargers, that was kind of there. Brandon Staley, Mike McCoy, Anthony Lynn. I just think anytime you get Kevin Warren and you get Ryan Poles and you get a lot of people, who do I answer to? That's tough to overcome. I mean, the same teams, Colin, basically win all the time. All the time. Listen, we make fun of the
Well, I mean,
Pittsburgh
John, look at
Steelers,
this.
but they win. I mean, if I was Ben Johnson, you know what I'd be hoping? Pittsburgh Steelers get blown out. Maybe Mike Tomlin, we trade him. I'd want to go there. I would not. Chicago's a place where guys go to get fired really quickly. I mean, so we've seen the same thing over and over.
Let me list the top of the NFL draft. Tell me if you've heard this before. Titans, Browns, Jaguars, Raiders, Jets, Panthers, Saints, Bears. I mean, it's just like, and increasingly the Giants. It's the same teams every year. And I've argued this forever, that it's the ownership. That's what it is. You can blame the players, the coach, and the GM, but it's overwhelmingly upstairs. A prime example is there's only one great quarterback that didn't make the playoffs, Joe Burrow. That's it. All the other great quarterbacks made it. The Brown family is arguably the most frugal in the league. Their front office is considered dysfunctional. Nothing against the GM, but they don't make any moves. They're the opposite of the Philadelphia Eagles. They make no moves.
Yeah.
They do nothing clever. Yeah, they don't do anything. They have their 7 picks. They take their picks. And it's one of those things where, generally, John, there's 7 new playoff teams a year. This year, 4, and 3 of those 4 got new quarterbacks. I think as the season is extended and quarterbacks are more valuable, it's easier to pick the NFL. I picked 6 of the 8 divisions right, and the 2 I missed on came down to the last couple of weeks. Like, I've said this multiple times. Raising kids, the days are long, the years fly by. In the NFL, picking the winners each week is hard, but predicting the season is getting easier. And I start looking around at these teams. The only way out from this abyss for Tennessee and Cleveland, New England, Jacksonville is the quarterback.
Let's face it.
I mean, to me, that feels like the only way out.
Look at Cincinnati as a good example. Today, Zach Taylor fired the defensive coordinator, who like a couple years ago, everyone's like, he's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. Well, what happened? They started letting guys walk. What has Joe Burrow been hammering home at his press conferences? You can't make a living letting good players walk out of the building. Who would not have let them walk? The Eagles, the Niners. When you get really good impact players, you let them walk. Jesse Bates walks right out. Their secondary was atrocious these last couple of years. And I think it's really hard to overcome that. And Joe Burrow's forced the ownership to get a little more aggressive than they're typically used to. And it feels like he's pressing their hand. Like, I want T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And he's probably still going to lose out on that argument. But I hear you. I think that number is going to, the day and age of like this constant huge turnover is dead. Because we also see like these young quarterbacks, it's easier now to play quarterback than ever. It's definitely less physical. Like, you can be a lot smaller than you could 20 years ago because you don't get hit as hard. But it is still very, very challenging. And I think when you add the extra pressures from the outside, mentally it can really break you. And we see that happen a lot. But I think we see consistent teams like maybe the Steelers, if they ever make a big change at quarterback or coach, could take a step back for a year or two. But like, what other teams, when you look at the playoff picture, do you see having big swings moving forward? Look at Tampa. Tampa's just a well-run organization now. Jason Light just
Yeah.
knows what he's doing. And Todd Bowles is solid. Not easy replacing Bruce Arians, but he's a solid coach. And they got the quarterback right, Baker Mayfield. Baker's a really good player right now, Colin. Like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah. No, I covered the Buccaneers when I worked down there. The Glazer family was non-meddling. Jason Light was one of the best scouts in pro football for years. Now he's the GM. They've always had good players. Brady hands it off to Baker Mayfield, good quarterback play. And Todd Bowles is not, he's not popular. He's on that sideline. He's very quiet, doesn't have much to say. But you always know you get an excellent effort from him. I mean, that team went into LA and destroyed the Chargers. I mean, moved the ball up and down the field on the number one defense in the league. So again, what I think you and I are getting at is I don't think you're gonna see these annual changes in the NFL. I think what we have here is if you have a good young quarterback, I think Mahomes and Allen and Lamar and Herbert, I think Jared Goff still is in his prime. I don't think these teams are going anywhere. I think they're just going to consistently win year after year.
Well, that's why the Colts are a good example. Jim Irsay sticking with the guys. But
I love that.
What are they going to do if that quarterback, they drafted him 4th overall, he's just not going to be good enough? One, he's not accurate, and two, he can't stay healthy. He has legitimate health concerns. You're just screwed. And you actually get the benefit of the doubt if you're Indy because their division stinks. But they're still, how could anyone pick that? I kind of liked him this year because I bet maybe Anthony Richardson becomes a good player, Shane Steichen, and it turns out I was wrong.
Same.
And now you definitely can't bet on it from a health standpoint. And I don't know if you saw the visual of Jim Irsay getting carted out. He looked like Weekend at Bernie's. He can barely, he's in bad shape. So, and he's, looks like he's 90, 65 years old. So that organization, that's one that was good for a long time. I'm just betting against moving forward until they figure out their quarterback situation that they have it in almost a decade now.
Yeah, I've talked about this. I think the one advantage there's a couple of things going on in the NFL. If you don't have a great quarterback, and there's about 6 great quarterbacks at any one time in the league, there's a lot of Liam Cohen's a great example. Kevin O'Connell's another great example. There are more smart offensive coaches than the league's ever had, which can take a C quarterback and make him a B quarterback. There's a lot of that. So that's the upside. Secondly, there's more good quarterbacks. John, if you go back to the 2018 class, where now Darnold, Baker, Josh, and Lamar all had career years. That is from 2018 until this past draft class, we've had 3 different classes that give you 4-star quarterbacks. So it used to be the Elway Marino class we talked about for 30 years. And now it's like about every other draft, every third draft, you get 4 or 5 guys that can play. This draft isn't considered a strong one. Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, but Riley Leonard, McCord out of Syracuse, I think he'll end up being like a 3rd-round quarterback that sticks in the league for a long time. Kyle McCord and I just think we're getting to a point. The good news is there's better quarterback coaching. You're getting a more consistent 3 or 4 first-round quarterbacks that can play. But it is pretty clear there is a certain group of owners that are either Irsay, kind of debilitating. They're in a bad state of affairs physically. McCaskies, they're old, a little bit out of touch, or they're Jerry Jones, where they have some sense of football knowledge they probably don't possess. So I tell people this all the time. If I am ever, going out with friends and they ask me about my business, everybody likes the NFL. And I always say, there's 7 great owners, 7 great coaches, 7 great coordinators, 7 great quarterbacks. Like Spags is unbelievable. I think Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson are unbelievable. Kingsbury as a coordinator is unbelievable. There is a finite number of great. Jesse Minter, I think right now is great. Harbaugh is. Just look at the teams right now, John. How many of them have all 3? The Chargers now have great coach, great coordinator, great quarterback. Chiefs have that. Lions have that. There's not many. There's about 5 franchises that have everything dialed up: the coach, the quarterback, and 1 great coordinator. And I think what it's doing, it's dividing the league. It's becoming more NBA, where you have a very strong top, a small middle, and a really soft, weak bottom.
Yeah, totally. If you had to pick the NFC Championship and AFC Championship right now, you would go Chiefs, Bills, or the Ravens. And last year was Chiefs versus the Ravens. And if you had to pick the NFC, obviously the 49ers missed, but you would pick the Lions. They have the number one seed, and they just have to win one game to get there.
Yeah.
And you'd probably pick the Eagles, who last year imploded, but the previous year were in the Super Bowl. So it's like the same teams. When I went to the Combine last year for the first time in a couple years, and listen, I'm lucky. I got hired by Andy Reid, so I just knew, the Chiefs guys, the Eagles guys, know the Niners guys. You just kind of start seeing the emblems and the way people carry themselves and the way they operate, and you're just like, it was so evident at the Combine, and that was before free agency and the draft. It's a 10-team league. Look at what the Ravens got going right now. I mean, they've been good for what, this entire century. The best, the most competitive foe they have, even though they missed the playoffs, is the Bengals because of the quarterback. But it's really hard to overcome that organizational frugal mindset at the end of the day. The Steelers, in theory, should be, but I bet it's a 10-point, spread by the time that game kicks off. They have no quarterback help in sight. And the offense, for whatever reason, feels like it's getting worse by the year. And then the Browns, I think everyone thinks highly of Stefanski and Andrew Berry, but you can't overcome that owner. He gave the guy $230 million. And they're just complete. And today, I don't know if you saw the news, I don't know, this is no one's fault, but he re-hurt his Achilles. That thing is just, the Russell Wilson, we've seen Carson Wentz, some of these big contracts, those don't hold a candle to the financial disaster that the Browns have. And what do? Right? They're drafting second. So it's like, okay, let's say you take Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. You cannot have Deshaun Watson there around that. So you just cut him and take a historic hit. You probably have to. And that's what the Ravens have to deal with. Meanwhile, they'll just, at worst, they'll be in the second round in a tight game against the Bills. And at best, maybe this is their year. They're in the Super Bowl. But they don't even have to worry about that franchise. Meanwhile, the AFC West is a good example. Obviously, the Raiders have a lot of question marks. But Andy's really got to try. He's got Harbaugh and Sean Payton, coming after him. Two guys that know what they're doing, that have been around the block, and obviously now have quarterbacks. I think Sean Payton, I saw a headline from our guy Mike Silver that said, you can't do this without a quarterback, and thank God we got one and figured it out. And they're just going to be a problem moving forward.
That was this week's Monday Night Football, brought to you by Uber Eats as the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. I use it very often. Every weekend, Uber Eats, best game day deals all season long. Order now for game day. And now for our next segment, Whiskey Business, brought to you by Green River Whiskey, the official whiskey of the Colin Cowherd podcast. If you want to enjoy life's simple pleasures, reach for Green River Whiskey. Whether it's rye whiskey, single barrel bourbon, you're getting over a century of craftsmanship packed into every bottle. Hop on over to greenriverwhiskey.com and discover a legend in a bottle today. So let's look at the Chargers are 2.5-point favorites at the Texans. My lean is the Chargers pass rush will give what's been a really shaky Texans O-line trouble. I would probably lean Chargers there. I think the Texans have been a hard team to figure out, have not been consistent in big games. I don't think this year, I think the regression of C.J. Stroud is mostly a protection issue. The Chargers come in with a much better defense. I'd lean L.A. What would you lean?
I would too, but their issue have been up the middle. Obviously the Chargers' dominant pass rush is on the edges. Last year, everyone picked the Browns. Now the Texans were playing better football, and remember, the Texans kicked their ass. Now Jim Harbaugh is a different animal than Flacco and Herbert, but that's one I think everyone's going to pick the Chargers. The Chargers playing a lot of ugly games. I could see that thing being weird. That'd be a game that looking at the early slate, I'm probably going to stay away because I think all the money's going to come in the Chargers, and then all of a sudden it's a tie game in the third quarter. Plus, just road playoff games are difficult to win. So it's just, we saw last year they won a home playoff game. It's a huge advantage even for the shitty team that's the 4th seed to host that game. I mean, that's to me, and the Texans are clearly comfortable playing Saturday afternoon. I think they played 8 of the last 10 years in that spot.
I think there's 2 games I feel strongly about. One of them is Ravens -10 at home against the Steelers. I think the Steelers, their organizational superiority, they beat some Raiders and Jets earlier in the season, but down the stretches, they just can't score. They can't move the ball consistently. I like the Ravens I think if they played 10 times, the Ravens this current makeup of both teams, I would take the Ravens to win 8 of them. You have any different feeling
Totally
about that?
agree. I mean, how could anyone pick the Steelers right now? They have what an awful month. I mean, they got boat raced in that 11-day stretch, and then even on was a Saturday night, they were down 19-7 going in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Russell,
Against the historically bad
as
defense.
this weather's gotten bad, he's looked a little different. Now it's not all his fault. George Pickens, they've hit on Antonio Browns and the Plaxicos and the Emmanuel Sanders. They've hit on a lot of wide receivers over the years. It feels like they were hoping this guy would be that, and it feels like he's melting a little bit under that pressure of being the number one guy. How do they keep going with what they're doing? I mean, just another one and done. I mean, Colin, they're a double-digit underdog against their bitter division rival. It's not even close.
Every Steeler team looks the same to me. They're just a slight variation on the previous team. Last year, they won 10 games. This year, they won 10 games. So again, I think structurally, foundationally, they're so well run. They always have good defense. There's no chaos. It's a consistent organization. And let's be honest, since 12 teams in the league aren't, they just win those games. But when you get to the upper crust, I mean, they're a 10-win team. Nobody in their right mind thinks they have even they could get several breaks and they wouldn't even get to the conference championship. So it's to me, Mike Tomlin, who would be a superstar on TV, I think he would knock it out of the park. I always say this: the Steelers and the Packers, two small market teams. One 30 years ago said we're going to be about offense, coaches, quarterbacks. We're going to draft defense in the first round, but we're going to be about drafting and developing offense, and we're never going to have bad O-lines. The Steelers, since Chuck Noll have decided, we're mostly going to be about defense. Even when they had Big Ben, they were a physical, tough team. He was a physical, tough quarterback. And they both have, a lot of Super Bowls, but doesn't it feel since Big Ben got out of his prime about 8 years ago, 10 years ago, they don't beat good teams. When is the last Steeler playoff win over a star quarterback? I mean, I can't think of one in a decade.
They haven't won a playoff game since 2016. It's 2025. To me, the fix is pretty easy. Mike Tomlin, I said this last year, looked kind of foolish halfway through the year, but it's come back to prove right that it's just time. Mike Tomlin, he'd be awesome on TV. All these openings would die to have Mike Tomlin. Why not go to the Bears? Trade him to the Bears. Unlike some of these other situations that got weird, you don't need to give a first-round pick. It's not like the Bears would have to give maybe a 2 and a 3 or somehow stagger it over the course of a couple years. Mike Tomlin gets a fresh start. He gets a young quarterback. And the Steelers can use their infrastructure of their organization. Go hire Ben Johnson and be equipped to handle him, get his idea with the quarterback, change the offense. Because this league, you said it forever about Belichick, the league changed. It's no longer about super tough. Obviously, you've got to have good defense. But if that's your number one goal, you're probably not going to win many Super Bowls. Hell, they can't win a playoff game. They can't win a playoff game. And now, at one point in time, they were 10-3. And now, wild card weekend, they're a 10-point underdog against the Ravens that they know better than anybody.
I do think it's a tough spot for the Broncos. I think their defense keeps them in it against the Bills. Usually if it's harsh weather, it helps the underdog because it muddies the game for everybody. But I do think the Bills win by about 10 points. I could see 28-20, 30-20. Do you see it differently?
It's hard to see a rookie quarterback, long trip at Buffalo. I like Buffalo handling them pretty well. This is a tough spot. This is raging success, right?
How about this? I want to throw something at you. So Sean Payton's a friend. And, one of the reasons in corporate America, it's hard to get a lot of stuff done because you have, the HR person here and there's certain things you can't say. But in pro football, you can call out another employee and be caustic and abrasive. And, that's why in the NFL, it's just a different ballgame. And so Sean Payton comes in. He never once says, Russell Wilson and I are the future. Very early, it's like, this office is embarrassing. You can't have a personal office. He can't figure out the plays. He can't read a defense. I mean, he goes after him. There's never a moment. The whole experience is uncomfortable. It's all discomfort. You couldn't do that in corporate America. You'd have to let somebody go, buy him out. You couldn't
Get
say the things
sued.
he said, and it's one you get sued. One of the things that's great about the NFL, and the reason you can turn around companies like the Chargers and the Broncos overnight, is because you can be harsh and punitive and intense and caustic. And people were giving Sean Payton, Aaron Rodgers was pushing back on the Nat Hackett comments. Sean Payton was right on effing everything. He was right on everything. Is that Bo Nix is better than Russell Wilson, and Nat Hackett did not know what he was doing, and it's why the NFL works. The tech's got a little bit of a feel like this. You can just rip another. It's competitive. You just go after people, and the NFL allows you to be incredibly harsh, blunt, and hurtful. But you can't turn around a corporation being precious and completely thoughtful. You got to get certain people out of the building. And as I go into this game, if the Broncos don't win, my takeaway is this has been any team losing in the first round, Washington and Denver, you'd have to tip your cap and say, guys, well done. Fantastic
While
year.
Dan and Sean have definitely different personalities, don't those two organizations parallel themselves? Denver had a famous historic Hall of Fame level owner, but was obviously really sick. His daughters were running. It was in shambles. They were in a bad spot. And Washington has one of the worst owners we've ever seen in pro sports. They both get fresh ownership with lots of money. And they went out. What is the first thing that Washington does? They hire Adam Peters, who'd been the best GM prospect in 5 years, and says, "Here, you run it." Right? What did the Walton family do after attempting the Rodgers thing? It fails. Wasn't all their fault. Like they kind of came in. Sean Payton here is a 90, $100 million. You do it. And what else do you need? Open checkbook. Look at the two franchises, and obviously both draft young quarterbacks that are equipped to handle that. Why? Because Adam Peters has worked for Belichick, Elway, and John Lynch, and Dan Quinn has a lot of experience. Sean Payton's been doing this for 25, 30 years. And both of them are by far the best two spots for the guy to go into. Look at Penix. I like Penix more than most of my scouting buddies. He goes to Atlanta, kind of a shit show. It's like you got Cousins. Even though Cousins is a great guy, it's just a weird spot for a young quarterback. Ton of pressure. It's like everyone Atlanta's going to win. Then Cousins starts falling apart. Then they insert him in late on a prayer, which is unfair. He gets none of the reps, and then they end up missing the playoffs. Now they win 8 games. And hell, the last game of the season, Bryce Young looks better than Penix. It's like that's just not a way to operate. And some of these people have no clue what they're doing. And then you watch Washington and you watch Denver, and it's like these people just know what they're doing. This league's hard enough. It's got to be one of the most competitive industries in America. Finance, it's a short list. So it's hard enough even if you know what you're doing, but to put yourself in a situation when you know what you're doing has such an advantage over all these teams that are just feel like they're kind of peeing in the wind.
Okay, my favorite bet of the weekend is the Eagles -4.5 against Green Bay. Jordan Love's hurt. Christian Watson's out. I think, and I like Jordan Love a lot. I think his inconsistency is why Matt LaFleur in this offseason went and got Josh Jacobs. I think they were signaling, it was a little bit of a bat signal. It was, we're going to be a power run team. That I don't think Jordan Love should be throwing it 36 times a game. I think it should be closer to 28 times a game, and I think they're very effective. But I think teams tell you what they think of their quarterbacks, and Matt LaFleur was telling you that Jordan can be erratic and a bit reckless. He's always been more Favre than Aaron Rodgers. I think this is a tough spot for him. I think Watson takes the lid off the defense. I think losing him makes it easier for this team to be defended, and I like Philadelphia kind of rolling.
Did you
Green
see the
Bay.
headline that Jalen Hurts is still in concussion protocol? We're 15, 20 days removed from that concussion. That to me is a little concerning. Now, could the Eagles at home with Kenny, if they had to, we still got 6, 7 days from recording this to when they play, but you got to start Kenny Pickett or Tanner McKee. Like, I'm sorry, you can lose a playoff game. But like you said, the Packers have not looked that good down the stretch at all. And Christian Watson, I think they became very dependent on him last year because he looked like this budding superstar. Injuries, and then it looks like he's got a torn ACL. It sucks to lose him, but maybe big picture this offseason, they can kind of pivot, find another guy to fill that role. If Jalen Hurts, though, like this, we talk about this in the NFL, it's very coach and quarterback dependent. If your quarterback can't play in a game and you got to go to a backup, like you could lose to the Packers at home. So that is something, if he clears tomorrow or the next day, feel fine. But that's something. Remember a couple years ago, was it Carson Wentz got a concussion in a playoff game? These playoff games, somehow Mahomes has like ankles like he's LeBron James. It can go the other way, and 10 minutes later he's back on the field. But sometimes in these playoff games, your heart drops when the quarterback gets injured. And hell, I would imagine Philadelphia, because the concussion protocol, unlike some other injuries, is a little out of your control. It's something that just,
Right.
it's just, I don't know. Now, their roster's so good. I mean, they could just run the ball and just overwhelm you physically.
I thought Jalen Hurts about 3 weeks ago played the best game I've seen him play as a pro. I don't know where statistically it was. When Jalen Hurts is running and he's rolling and he's got the pass run option, I think they're so hard to defend because the offensive line in Barkley, they could just play football in between the tackles and never run outside. And then when they add that component, and then it's A.J. Brown over the top, I know everybody likes Kansas City to win another Super Bowl, but when Philadelphia is healthy and when the Lions are healthy, those rosters just look better than everybody. And that Philadelphia offense, again, they could just be a between the tackle power offense and be very effective when everything's working. I think the drop off from Jalen Hurts to backups is substantial. Now, again, it depends on who you're playing, but we'll keep our eye on that.
I would say this. I
Bucks,
would say health. There's 5 teams that can win the Super Bowl: Lions, Eagles, Chiefs, Ravens, Bills. Are we in agreement there? So
yes,
those are the. I have a hard time
yes.
seeing the Rams have just kind of looked. I don't even count the last game, but have not played well down the stretch. The Bucks, I just don't think have enough on the personnel standpoint, and our guy Sam Darnold came back to earth a little bit the other night.
So, Bucks Commanders, I don't have a strong feel for. I want to go to Rams hosting Minnesota. So I like the Minnesota matchup because I think people now are selling because it was such a standalone game and had so many viewers that people saw Darnold and everybody is selling Darnold stock. When I thought it was like it felt like a playoff game. It was a precursor. It was like the reason that restaurants have soft openings is you're not quite ready for the speed of the big opening, and I don't think Sam was quite ready for at Detroit, biggest game in 5 decades, a better roster, a big pass rush. I think Minnesota, the Rams have really struggled to put consistent halves of football together offensively. They're very Puka Nakua dependent. Cooper Kupp now is more of a blocker. We've talked about this. If they can't engineer a running game to start, they just become it's Stafford and Puka. That's pretty much it. I think the Vikings bounce back. I think their receiving core is a real problem for the Rams secondary. Rams will draft a quarterback second or third pick. They'll take a corner number one. You have a strong feeling about that
Yeah, I
game?
mean, I would lean. I think the Rams. Darnold started seeing ghosts a little bit the other night. Now, granted, they were blitzing him every single play, but it really got to him. And the Rams have better personnel than what the Lions were just rolling out. Still pretty injured, at least up front. And if you can get pressure on Sam, here's the thing: their left tackle tore his ACL a while back, so they still have some question marks up front. Now, Sam, why we were so high on him, he was moving around and making plays. If he can shake that and be a goldfish and forget about that game and get back to what he's been most of the season, I'm with you. I like Minnesota. But if any of that lingers, is there a player right now in the NFL with just more on the line? It felt like in this game and last game. I mean, we're talking 150 million dollars, and you play another game like that, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, maybe we'll franchise you. Like things. That's the best part about the NFL: how fluid it is, how fast it moves. They do
Yeah.
have at the end of the day, they do have this other quarterback sitting there, whether we think it's crazy or not. Like he does exist on their roster, and I would imagine most people would say JJ McCarthy might be the number one pick in this draft. We've said it about Drake May, but he definitely would be a top 5 pick in this draft. We'll see how it plays
Yes.
out. So if you have another game where you're just looking atrocious and overthrowing guys like that, that's how fast things change, especially when I don't have any equity with you. We saw it with Cousins. He had no equity. He just showed up. No, not saying they don't, they really like Sam, clearly. But you lose a game that gets me the number 1 seed, then you lose a playoff game in the first round. We all know these guys. I mean, they could. We saw how fast Sean McVay turned on Jared Goff, and they had been working together for years. So this This
Yeah.
league, when you're talking, especially about the amount of money you're talking at the quarterback position, it can be pretty
Yeah.
cutthroat if you don't produce. So I, I, I feel like everyone's going to kind of overlean Minnesota. That was a one-off. I don't know. I think Sean McVay, what usually plays in the playoffs? Coaching. Well, I would take Sean over Kevin O'Connell, even though I like Kevin O'Connell. And I just think that they've been there, done that. There's a lot of pressure on Sam going home, Monday Night Football. That's a pretty intense environment, Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I thought last night Sam was overwhelmed. I thought he missed on two, potential touchdowns. He was high, lot of energy, a lot of juice, and it kind of overwhelmed him. I defended him today. I said, listen, last year, Week 18, he was starting for the Niners. Like he went from bust to starting for the Niners to the biggest game in the history of Detroit Lions football in my adult life. So I like Minnesota, but you're not the first person. Jason McIntyre really likes the Rams this week. NFL playoffs? We're talking about NFL playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is a key to winning in the NFL playoffs, and the key to you scoring big is betting on them at DraftKings, the number one place to bet touchdowns. If you're ready to place your first bet, make it really simple. A player scoring a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook's app, download it, make your pick. Here's another reason to watch your favorite players crush it on the playoffs. If you're a new customer, you bet $5, that's it. $5, get 200 in bonus bets instantly by betting just $5. So score big, DraftKings Sportsbook during the playoffs. Download the app, use the code Colin, COLIN. That will get you $200 in bonus bets if you bet the $200. So if you want $200 in bonus bets, you got to put in the code Colin. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook, the crown is yours. This week's college football preview is brought to you by our friends at Cosm. It's the world's greatest fan experience. So if you're in Los Angeles or you're in Dallas, you want an immersive football experience, check out the college football playoffs in shared reality at Cosm. Every play comes to life, putting you right on the field. Watch the Orange Bowl on Thursday, January 9th. Catch the Cotton Bowl on Friday, January 10th. Then the National Championship live from the ATL, Monday, January 20th. I want to throw something at you. This real quick. I want to throw this at you. I want to talk about Notre Dame versus Penn State and Ohio State versus Texas. So Ohio State, Texas will probably get the bigger rating because of Buckeyes, Longhorns. But I was thinking about this the other day. Is that Notre Dame, I think Marcus Freeman was on my show, and I'm not sure if he said it then or in the preamble before he was on my show. They haven't lost anybody to the transfer portal. And I was thinking about this, John. The advantage Notre Dame has on the rest of the country in this transfer portal. So they have a young A++ recruiter in Marcus Freeman. That in these days, that really helps. A lot of these Brian Kellys, I was talking to a coach about Brian Kelly. I said, what's wrong with LSU? And the coach said, Brian Kelly was about ready to retire in Notre Dame. He took that job for the money. He didn't want to put the time in. Their recruiting's gone down. Brian is on the back nine. He's probably on the 17th hole. He thought he could go down there and make it work and win a natty. But the truth is he was worn out at Notre Dame. And then somebody threw him a pile of money that he never thought he would make. But one of the things about this time, the transfer portal, the NIL, old guys like Saban, or in basketball, even easier in basketball, Jay Wright, older guy. It's too much. Jim Larinaga, the coach, the Miami Hurricanes basketball coach, it's overwhelming. So if you have a young coach, a Ryan Day, a Marcus Freeman, you have a young coach with a ton of energy, huge advantage. Secondly, Notre Dame doesn't lose guys to the portal because the players that go to Notre Dame are going there for the academic experience and the football experience. So it is the one football power in the country beyond Stanford and Northwestern that consistently has bigger revenue, has a better TV package, and historically has paid more for coaches. And I look at Notre Dame and Penn State and I think this could be a really interesting 10-year run for Notre Dame. If you watch the SEC this year, John, it was very clear. They just didn't look as dominant. I mean, Notre Dame matched up with Georgia. And I mean, to me, Ohio State looks like the most talented team in the country. And Michigan was the best team last year. And if Ohio State wins this year or Notre Dame, it's back-to-back Northern teams winning. And the advantage Notre Dame has is they may be the one team in the transfer portal era because what is the transfer portal creating, John? Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly know this. Chemistry issues. These guys don't grow up together. It's just Ole Miss will go buy 8 great players, 12 great players. Notre Dame, if Notre Dame beats Penn State, I've been thinking about this. They may have a cultural edge on the rest of college football that they do recruit elite players, but they don't. You'll be able to have a more formidable cohesion and chemistry with your roster on an annual basis.
Well, one thing Notre Dame, a huge advantage they have, and we had a good family friend growing up who was a very successful businessman who had played at Notre Dame in the 60s. And they get these golf tournaments together all over the country because they're not all their people, like a Stanford or a USC go work New York, LA, Florida. They have a lot of money behind that program. When Greg Byrne at Alabama comes out with a tweet begging fans for money, you know who's not going to have to do that? Notre Dame. So at the end of the day, I think NIL is kind of a stupid, like that term feels a little outdated. You're just buying the player. I'm paying them a salary to play for me.
Yeah.
And if Notre Dame, true, and Marcus Freeman, you win a couple playoff games, all of a sudden people are going to like that. They will not have a problem cutting huge checks. I mean, I see it here with Kenny Dillingham on the local news begging for money. It's hard. I can't even imagine being in that situation. Marcus Freeman will never have to beg for checks as long as he's winning. And I think that is a huge advantage. I think we see it with some of these Southern teams. That is a disadvantage for Alabama. That is a disadvantage for LSU. It's not, Texas A&M, not a disadvantage because they have huge. Arkansas, sneaky, not a disadvantage. They just don't have the right coach. I think Notre Dame, if they can figure out how to balance the academic requirements, but Northwestern's down, Stanford's down, who are they really competing against? For that top, Andrew Luck, David DeCastro, there are only so many of them. Well, they got the market cornered. And to me, financially, they have an unlimited. Part of the reason I think Stanford hired Andrew Luck, obviously he kind of missed it and wanted the juice. But when Andrew Luck calls a guy worth $100 million as a Stanford alum, that guy will call him back. If Troy Taylor, the football coach, had called him, he might not. And I think Marcus Freeman, now with the momentum going and people start getting a taste, I think they've already had the success where their budget is going to be as high as any because they have the funds. I mean, it's impossible to not work in business or be around. You're in Los Angeles. How many Notre Dame people do you hear of that just have unlimited amount of money and want to be part of the program? It's a really that university, if you went there, means a lot to these people. And I think the one thing that they will always fight against is it is hard to get certain positions in there. Like they never really have great wide receivers, right? Or top 10 corners. Sometimes academically you got to push, and that's something the more success Marcus Freeman has, he can push back. But I think they have looked defensively where Brian Kelly had good teams. This team looks much more like an SEC, Ohio State, Texas speed-wise. You're like, holy shit.
No. When I watched Notre Dame, Georgia, and I watched Notre Dame's corners, they were not getting beat down the field. No. I felt like Notre Dame, you could switch jerseys. I couldn't tell. I thought Notre Dame looked great. And I do think, they're called collectives. I think kind of the issue you're finding with this stuff is that there's a chemistry problem. So you bring in players, they get paid, and then guys that are already there don't get paid as much. And I think Notre Dame's edge is you don't go to Notre Dame to get a paycheck. You go for a legacy. I mean, that's one of the reasons Duke basketball and Mike Krzyzewski beat John Calipari in Kentucky. And Calipari, so predictably, threw a hissy fit, is that, it was this one and done culture. And then Krzyzewski started selling, we're not about one and done. You're a Blue Devil for life. This is more than basketball. And they started taking some of those top players from Calipari. And Calipari's like, hey, this thing about selling for life. And it's like, John, you're a salesman. And when John Paul Calipari started saying, hey, I'm not here to win in March, it's like, bro, it's over. Like, yes, you're hard. But the point is, Duke, like Notre Dame, sold, you're a Dookie for life. Our business connections for life will set you up. Kentucky's not going to sell that. LSU probably doesn't have that, but Notre Dame and Duke do.
Think about this. I saw someone tweet, I don't know the exact number, is like the amount of former NFL players' kids that are at Notre Dame. Now, some of them, like Bryant Young, played at Notre Dame. His son Bryce, who I would bet on number 30, the 6'7" pass rusher, who's a backup right now, who's a true freshman, being a future top 10 pick in a couple years. But if you're a former player, and these guys now, guys that are 50, 55 years old, they're a lot of their children are blue chip recruits. If you play in the NFL long enough, you see how cutthroat it can be, how fast everything can end. You actually have a different perspective of just funnel them to the best college, for football. Well, I want to go the best. It was a huge point of difference for Stanford for a long time. We can take you to the NFL, but we can also send you to Wall Street or Silicon Valley, where you can probably end up making more money. So I think Notre Dame has that double edge. I think Ohio State and Michigan have always kind of had that because they've had, it's a really, really good school, and obviously they take football really seriously. But I think Marcus Freeman, the recruiting standpoint, they feel just much faster than they did under the Brian Kelly. And now you watch Brian Kelly at
Totally
LSU,
agree.
you're like, maybe he doesn't have a great feel. Like one thing Saban was elite at, he could just identify a guy, future top 10 pick. I mean, he was the best at it. And I think Kirby clearly followed Saban from that, and they're great at that. But mostly, like Ohio State at this point in time, kind of recruits itself, and they can get anyone they want in the school. Whatever Marcus Freeman's figuring out, that speed they had on defense against Georgia is like these are
Yep.
mirror images of each other. And that's where
Yes.
Brian Kelly used to get
No question.
overwhelmed. Remember the speed and the physicality? It's like, yeah, this is just a different level of pace.
I also think the SEC has had the best and the most NFL bodies for 20 years. I think more than any conference in college football, they're getting rated. And as you pointed out earlier, SEC teams do not have many times the level of boosters. I mean, I think the biggest Alabama booster, I could be wrong, is like Bear Bryant's son. I mean, Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, they just
Oh,
have certain, Penn State have certain advantages. So I think when I watched SEC football this year, it just did not look as dominant. And I thought Notre Dame's defense and Ohio State's offense and Michigan's O line and D line last year looked better. My
well,
eye
is
test.
it shocking that Sark? I mean, what an advantage he has. Because forever it was like, how's Texas going to be able to
Oh,
go into the
God.
SEC? Well, they will because they have a huge bank account that's bigger than everyone else. And they
Yep.
came right in, SEC championship. Who's going to pick next year? Sark's got to be a top one or two, in terms of the preseason ranking in the SEC. For the foreseeable future, he has a massive advantage, even just over Alabama and LSU. He's going to lap them.
Yep. So Ohio State faces Texas. This game to me is fascinating. So I like Ohio State. Texas, I can never wrap my arms around them. I struggle sometimes for them to get three straight good offensive series. I think they're hit and miss. They're very much a splash offense. They need big plays, and they hit on them. I mean, against Arizona State, backed into a corner, they hit on a couple of big plays late. Who's facing more pressure, Ryan Day or Sark? So think about this. Ohio State backed up the Brinks truck, $20 million for this team. They look aesthetically like the best team. And they have rebounded from that Michigan loss with two dominating wins. But again, if they lose to Texas, people are going to say, when's the last time you beat Michigan? That's probably the worst loss in our program in 20 years. If Sark doesn't win a natty, it'll probably be because we feel like his roster underachieved. Because I think going into the season, many felt that was the best roster. To you, who's the pressure on? This game is fascinating. Ryan Day or Sark, who's going to get more shit when they
Yeah, I don't
lose
even
this
think it's
game?
close. I think it's Ryan Day. I mean, Sark, Texas was dead, and they're going back-to-back years in the semifinals. And just he has the thing on an upward trajectory. He just had him in the SEC championship year one. Ryan Day took over, just a program that was rolling, right? Full of NFL guys, and he just hasn't quite got there. Now, the way they've looked the last 2 weeks, I don't see how they would not win the national championship if they can play like that two more times. But I think there's still a ton of pressure on Ryan Day. Now, if you're betting on this, you'd have to pick Ohio State to win it all. But listen, Texas's roster isn't that much different than Ohio State, and unless Will Howard can just keep playing, is he just going to keep playing like Peyton Manning in his prime? Because if he does, then they're going to beat everybody. But if he has a bad game, Texas is really good on defense. It took Scadaboo
Yeah.
having one of the crazier halves you've ever seen. Like, eventually, Ohio State is just going to play in a tighter game. I mean, they have two just back to back absolute blowouts. What do they look like when they get in a little tighter game? Because we just saw them in a tight game against Michigan. They kind of folded. And whatever Ryan Day has done, and it was kind of easy, right? They had really got embarrassed. All those guys have returned. They got an extra week off, and they came out and they showed out. But I do think one of these games, one of these last two games, I like Penn State against Notre Dame. I think Penn State is just a little more talented, or at least equal to Notre Dame, but I like their quarterback more, at least the way, from a throwing standpoint. And I think Penn State could beat them, and I think Texas, in theory, could beat them. I'm picking Ohio State, but if Ohio State wins the national championship, you beat Texas, then you beat Penn State or Notre Dame. Like that would be really impressive, and then haters like me wouldn't be able to say anything about Ryan Day. I already think Sark's already kind of proven like he's really good. Back-to-back semifinals.
Yeah.
Got Arch Manning, got a team just loaded with guys that aren't even draft eligible. I can't even imagine what their transfer portal class is going to look like whenever the season ends. Like they're not going anywhere. I think this year was all about Ryan Day, the cash they had spent on the team. He got Chip Kelly makes $2.5-3 million a year. I think there was a lot of pressure on this individual team.
Yeah, I think, and I also think Sark, if he got heat, I think he's viewed in NFL circles as capable of coaching at that league. For years, Brian Kelly sniffed around at Notre Dame for the NFL, and I was told by an NFL GM that people thought he was a college coach, a really good college coach. Sark is viewed by NFL guys as like if Sark said tomorrow he loses to Ohio State and says, I want the Chicago Bears job, he'd be a top 3 candidate immediately. I think the NFL, I mean, he was a coordinator in the NFL and a very good one. So I think Sark.
I think the fit just works.
Listen,
Doesn't
you
it?
can.
The Sark Austin, it just feels like a pretty seamless fit right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a big presence, and I think Sark is one of those guys. People have criticisms for him, but if in any industry, if you keep getting hired by really smart people, I mean, Washington's a good program, USC's a good program, Texas is a good program. He's been the head coaching job. Nick Saban knows what he's doing. Like really smart people and good programs keep hiring him. It's like when Andy Reid got let go by Philadelphia. 45 minutes later, he was on the phone with the Hunt family. Smart people. Jim Harbaugh is always going to get work. John Harbaugh, if he was available, would get work. I think Sark's one of those guys that's imminently hireable. I think his teams can be a little loose and lack a little bit of an identity. The old thing the Patriots used to say, we're not a collection of players, we're a team. Sometimes Sark teams can feel a little bit like a collection of a handful of really good players, not a team. And it's not I know he's a good coach. I know he's a great recruiter, but his teams can be a little loose for my taste sometimes. I think they throw too many jump balls up the sidelines. Quinn Ewers too often just throws it up for grabs. It drives me nuts. I hate that. Low percentage fades or corners. But I think I like Ohio State and Notre Dame. But I will say about Penn State, Abdul Carter, that rush end, if he's healthy, John, if he got drafted #1, I don't think it's crazy. I think he's so good.
Don't they have a big advantage with the game getting delayed? They played, basically 2 days before Notre Dame. Notre Dame then had to travel home. I think Penn State's looked really good. I like Penn State in that game for sure.
I don't think it's crazy. They've got 4 or 5 elite players. James Franklin gets some shit because he can't beat the good teams. But I would point out to, if you look at his record against top 10 teams, yeah, that was Georgia and LSU when they ruled college football. He was in Vandy, and it was LSU, Alabama, Georgia. So he was struggling at Vandy, and now he's struggling with Ohio State and Michigan with Harbaugh. It's like, guys, you have to contextualize James Franklin's struggles against top 10 teams. It's been Jim Harbaugh, Ryan Day, and when he was down at Vandy, he was facing, LSU teams and Nick Saban teams, and the beginning of Georgia's
If he beats
teams.
Notre Dame and Ohio State takes advantage of and beats Texas, it is a pretty good opportunity given how well he knows Ohio State. Plays them every year. Played them, I mean, the best they've ever played them this year. Had a very good chance, obviously, to tie the game at the goal line, and they ran it right up the middle. Their team physically, given their quarterback, like to me, the best NFL quarterback prospect playing right now is Drew Aller. And one advantage they have is these bowl games are not outside in frigid temperatures. And Tyler Warren has been dominant. The running back's been dominant. The question is Abdul Carter and the arm injury. In college, they don't really have to talk about what the status is, but if he's healthy, how good does their front seven look? I mean, they are so physical. They got DBs. They are very, very, both these two teams, you could argue all four. Someone's going to get injured in these games. It's just like the NFL playoffs. And if you're the winning team and it's one of your impact players, that could be a huge problem. Chip Kelly mentioned this at the start of the playoffs. He's like, no one's really talking about this. The attrition of guys aren't used to playing this many games. And these are better teams. These are just more, it's usually just one bowl game. Maybe the Final Four, it was 2. Now you're playing, Ohio State would play 4. Penn State would play 4. Texas would play 4. That's a lot of games on the bodies of 20-year-olds, even if they are future top 10, top 20 picks.
John Middlekauff, former NFL scout. That was a good hour. We put together almost an hour of good stuff. We head to the playoffs. John, as always, buddy, I
Can't
appreciate
wait.
it.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, man.
I judge the quality of a fragrance by the compliments you get. When I wore Ovation for the first time, second time, and third time, usually I walk past somebody and they're like, hey, what you got on? Who over there smelling good? You know, that's the injection of confidence right there to you.
That's right. We want to be at the forefront of using the brand as a gateway for these young athletes. Custom suit, we do a photo shoot, we do video, and it's all about that partnership to create a personal brand.
And I love you guys associating it with more sophistication. Throwing a suit on a kid, sometimes it takes for you to see yourself with a suit on in the mirror to be like, hey, I have more to offer.
Ovation for Men, we're part of Amazon's Black Business Accelerator. You know, Amazon has invested $150 million for the next 4 years to uplift small businesses like myself to scale. You know, Amazon is really putting their money where their mouth is.
They're committed to excellence on every level. They want to scale these businesses to be amongst the best in whatever industry they're in.
You've always been authentic. You've always been pushing excellence.
Well, I appreciate that.
As our slogan says, every man deserves an ovation.
Yes, sir.
Listen, this relationship with Ovation for Men, Richard Sherman, the volume, this is just the beginning.
I appreciate you guys letting me be a part of your journey. If you haven't already checked them out, go out there, get your man some. Get the sport too. And it can be Christmas, birthday, holidays, or yesterday. But make sure you get it.